I had gotten COVID while I was on a school camping trip, so COVID-19. My body, in response to this infection, it triggered an autoimmune reaction and it attacked the beta cells in my pancreas. So they pricked my finger and they read on the scale a number that was almost 10 times the normal range of what blood sugar should be. I was scared. I think the part that scared me the most was the idea of being out of control. And so you have to throw out one of these every 10 days. In the past 3 weeks, I have 3 of them.
You have turned this adversity into an opportunity.
I proposed a solution, I came up with a little product, and I presented it.
Please welcome Cristiano Da Silva.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cristiano, and I'm very happy to be here today on the show.
To start off, can you please share a few words about yourself so the audience gets to know you?
Yeah. So my name is Cristiano, and I am a student from Toronto, Canada, and I've been particularly focused on trying to improve treatment for people with chronic illnesses. Specifically, my focus has been with type 1 diabetes most recently, and I'm an engineering student, so I try to approach things from a bit of a technical aspect, bringing about some biomedical solutions and ways that we can actually improve and innovate with the actual resources we have, but at the same time trying to approach things from the social aspect too. So I think there's value in combining the two, and I try to center myself in the intersection between some of that more technical side and a bit of the social aspect as well.
Cristiano, your story is truly inspiring. I have read something about you. There was an article in the LinkedIn. I went through that article also, and I came to know that you were in a school camp. And here you came to know that you had type 1 diabetes. Can you tell us more about that? What was your age that time, and how did you know what happened?
Yeah. So I was initially the beginning of my origin with diabetes. I had gotten COVID while I was on a school camping trip, so COVID-19. And I felt very unusual symptoms that I wasn't really reading much about online. But I knew that I did have COVID because I tested positive when I took one of the PCR tests. And so my symptoms over 3 weeks, I came back from the camping trip and they were only getting worse. And I had a weird taste in my mouth, which usually I've heard comes from COVID. So I assumed that, okay, maybe it's just a particularly bad case. Maybe I'm feeling unusual response to this, but it could just be my immune system reacting in a way that's not very well documented. But what was actually happening was my body, in response to this infection, it triggered an autoimmune reaction. And rather than tackling only the coronavirus, it also attacked the beta cells in my pancreas, which are responsible for producing the hormone insulin. And so that is the characteristic of type 1 diabetes, where your body essentially stops or largely stops the ability to actually produce insulin, and it essentially wipes out most of the beta cells. And it starts off getting rid of most of them and then progressively gets worse. So yeah, so I had these very strange symptoms and I wasn't entirely sure what was happening. So eventually, after a couple days of going to school, and I felt extremely tired, all my muscles were sore. As I would walk to class, I would feel that like this cramping sensation no matter how much water I drank. I was drinking like 4 or 5 liters of water a day at some times, and I was just still constantly dehydrated. And so I decided to go to the hospital and see what this could be. And so as I'm waiting in the hospital, they asked to take a blood test, but it's not like the conventional blood test that I've seen. It was a blood sugar test. So they pricked my finger and they read on the scale a number that was almost 10 times the normal range of what blood sugar should be. And so I, at the time, didn't know this, but immediately it was evident to them that this could only be a sign of type 1 diabetes or a false reading on the machine, but they proved later that it actually was. And so in that moment, it was a very big shock to me
The
because
life
I
changing.
hadn't had anyone in my family either that had this condition, and I essentially knew nothing about it. So I did some research, like in the moment after I processed it and went through all the fear that I had, and I saw that it was a permanent condition, which is something that like is not the most welcoming to hear because usually you get a condition and then there's a chance that it can go away or there's a chance it gets worse. But with type 1 diabetes, it's a bit interesting because it just stays usually at the same level and you can regulate it with insulin and very, very specific treatment, and very accurate, which I can get into a bit more later. But yeah, that's essentially my story going from an unusual diagnosis, infection, and then kind of ending up in the hospital and learning to respond from it from there.
It must have totally changed your life. What was your age at that time?
Oh, right. Yeah. So it was quite late actually for the average case from what I've read, but I got it about almost 3 years ago now. So I think honestly, being a bit older makes it easier to manage because you can actually be a bit more conscious and like aware of what actually it takes to deal with it. Whereas if, for example, I had gotten the diagnosis when I was 3, 4 years old, I wouldn't know what was happening. And so the responsibility would be largely on my parents. But I think for the better, I had the chance to take responsibility because my parents were already going through enough stress just seeing me in the hospital. So I think me being able to approach it logically and actually say, okay, well, I have this. How can I get over this? And how can I actually learn to deal with it? I think being a bit older definitely helped.
Did you feel frustrated? I mean, like, what were your emotions at that time?
I was scared. I
Mm.
didn't know whether this condition could be painful, whether it could be something that made me feel worse, or even those symptoms that I was feeling in that moment, if they would entirely go away. And I was a bit, I think the part that scared me the most was the idea of being out of control and not knowing whether I could manage what I was doing. And if this feeling of helplessness that I had had for those 3 weeks before my diagnosis, if that was just something that was going to continue. So the biggest worry and the biggest emotion that I was feeling at that moment was fear, felt anxiety as well. And I think shortly after my diagnosis, like strangely enough, it was starting to feel somewhat interesting actually because I was reading into the condition and I was learning more about it and I was kind of getting more of the science understanding behind it. And as someone who's very interested in, I've always loved science and like learning about the human body. So like reading some more about that, I could kind of link what was happening from the science point into what I was feeling, and I thought that was a really interesting way of approaching it.
The surprise. Many kids right now, they would feel anxious, but you felt like different. You were like, how do I say it?
You use the word interesting.
Interesting. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
It was
I know
interesting.
somebody who she has a daughter. She's 12. She was 12 when she knew she was type 1 diabetes.
Mhm.
And the girl's life it changed upside down. She had to miss 1 year of school. But I think you turned it into an opportunity where you did something about it. So when did you feel like you need to do something about that continuous glucose monitor that you had to keep wearing?
Initially, right, for those I also had to miss school for about a month, I think, because there's just so much information that you have to learn, and going to school and focusing on like math and your English class, like it's too much of a distraction to have to get used to all this technology. And to like put into context how much you have to learn, you have to essentially reshape the way that you approach eating because every meal sort of becomes a calculation, right? You look at a place, let's say you have a nice plate of, let's say you have a nice place of rice, chicken, potatoes. It's very Portuguese of me, but let's say you have a nice plate of that, right? So immediately you have to start looking at it and say, okay, that's about 35 grams worth of carbs in the rice. And then the potatoes, that's maybe 10%. And maybe there's a little fat that would delay it. So, right, when you have it, like this learning curve that you have to get over with, and that takes a long time that you have to deal with. So initially, when you're diagnosed, they, at least from what I was given from my hospital, they start you off with a lower level of how much technology you have. So you start off with a little device that pokes your finger, draws a little bit of blood, and then you read it that way. So that's a finger prick sensor. Um, and then as you get a bit more familiar with that and you understand kind of the habits and the routines of how you actually deal with the blood sugar and manage your regulate your levels, then you can kind of work your way up into more complicated tech. So that's where it comes into that glucose monitor you were talking about. So after you get good with the manual inserts, then you have something that can, I think I have one on my arm. Yeah. Then it stays on your arm, small little filament inside your, it's the interstitial fluid, which is essentially, it's like a midway between being fully blood and being fat, like, or being surface. So it's like somewhere in the middle, and it reads those actual blood sugar levels. So it makes it so much easier because you don't actually have to poke your finger anymore. And so I was noticing that this technology was making my life so much easier because my fingers were grateful. Like they weren't bleeding anymore, and I didn't have to poke them with a little sword. They call it a lancet, which is funny because a lancet is like, a lance is like the thing that you use to actually fight. So it's essentially you're poking your finger and drawing blood. And so the fact that one piece of tech could make my life so much easier, I was thinking to myself that this is really amazing. And I'm just so grateful that, first off, the technology exists. And second of all, that I have the access to it, because there's people around the world that still have this condition and just can't get it for either financial reasons, inaccessibility in the communities that they're in, and could be local laws and legislature that just haven't gotten the technology there or approved it yet. So I was like so grateful that this technology was making my life so much easier. And so I started looking at it and I was thinking, I'm like, hey, so what are some ways that what are some ways that this technology is doing great? And, also, what are some ways that maybe I'm a bit frustrated by? Like, what are some things maybe that could work on, that could improve it a little bit more? So I want to see if I have some. I do. Give me 1 second.
It's okay.
Yeah. So the device that you use to apply those is called a applicator. So you basically press a little button, and then it inserts this thing onto your skin, the glucose monitor. It stays into your skin. So this is basically the device that you press, stays on your skin, and then unfortunately, the thing that I was frustrated with is this whole device has to go in the garbage. And so you have to throw out one of these every 10 days. And it's a lifelong condition, which means you're going to have a lifetime supply of these little wastes. So just in the past 3 weeks, I have 3 of them. And in 3 years of having diabetes, I essentially have an entire box full, which comes out to, I think, around 100 of them. And there's no way you can throw them out in a garbage can because they have a needle. But they're also too large to fit inside the sharps containers. So I was frustrated with the medical waste aspect. And I looked at that and I thought, okay, well, I know I'm learning a little bit about 3D modeling at the time. So maybe I could try and approach it and say, hey, can I maybe make a prototype of something that had a little disposable part where the needle and the spring mechanism is? And can I take the rest of it and maybe make it like a little button? So I kind of researched that for a bit. I came up with some little designs, broke that apart, and tried to understand how it worked. And without getting too much into the specifics, what that venture really showed me was that if you have this technology or you have something that's truly very impactful in your life and the lives of others who are going through similar conditions or similar experiences, and there's something about it that you either think can be improved upon, or there's a problem regarding it that's frustrating you in some way, So, like me with this medical waste, maybe someone else in their respective area can have a similar concern that they have. If you notice a problem like that, then you can kind of approach it and say, hey, I have a small little subset of skills in the grand scheme of things, but how can I actually take the things that I'm good at and try and apply them in a way that'll actually present a solution? You don't have to have the problem fully solved because at the end of the day, you're just someone working towards a goal, right? So I'm not going to claim that I solved medical waste, but I proposed a solution. I came up with a little product and I presented it. So just the act of thinking about a solution, researching it, and presenting it, that can oftentimes be enough to actually help you better understand the issue and also help show the importance of tackling that to others.
That's great. There
Yeah,
is a
thank you.
there's a lot of hidden opportunity out there.
Yeah, of course.
Why do you have to throw this current continuous glucose monitor in every 10, like in 10 days?
Let me see if you can see them. Sorry about that. So, I don't think this. Oh yeah, I don't think you can see it, but uh, there's this. Oh, you see the needle? There's a little
Yes.
needle right there. So the needle usually, in the medical space, needles can never be reused. It depends the type, but typically for safety reasons and health and sanitary, needles shouldn't be reused. And so, because this makes contact, and the actual way that the device is set up, it's essentially when you press the button, it releases all the spring power that it has, and then the mechanism dies. So it's like a one-time fire. How would I compare it to something? It's like charging up a catapult where you have to like wind it back, right? A catapult. So a catapult, yeah. So you have to pull it back, and then when you let go, it launches it,
Okay.
right? It's a similar idea, but then when it launches, it breaks as well. So like it launches and then you can't wind it back up because there's not enough power. So yeah, that's sort of like the simple way of explaining it. Essentially, what's happening is there's a spring that comes, uh, it comes set up so that it can work one time, and then afterwards the spring loses its potential, and then it can't be run again.
So you're doing it on your own. You're putting the continuous glucose monitor every 10 days on your own and pulling it off on your own.
Yeah,
Was it scary at first, or you just got used to it in the very first instance? Did somebody else do it for you first?
I think my sister did it for me the very first time. Um, because I think for the first few months, I was only putting it on my stomach.
You can
Uh,
put it on your stomach also instead of here?
yeah, so with diabetes, there's four main sites where you can either take insulin or read sugars, like four main ones depending on the age group. But there's your arm, your abdomen, so near your belly button around there, and like a bit on the side as well. So yeah, you can do triceps, a bit near your abdomen. You can do your thigh, and then you can do your butt. But so yeah,
How
so
do you
those
do it then?
yeah, that's the thing. Usually you don't. You can, but like I
With a lot of
wouldn't.
muscle there.
Yeah, so you need something with a bit more fat content, but also as far away from any bone that it could come into contact with. So if you put it somewhere like your forearm, there's a lot of cartilage there, and there's your tibia. It's not going to work, and it just doesn't really connect in the same way. So it's not going to read the right levels. But yeah, that's from what the data is. It's mainly those four sites.
I have a curious question.
Yeah.
There are tons of people with diabetes out there. Do you ever envision a product? See, nowadays there is like either there is a capillary test or there is a vein test, then only we can know. I am talking about type 2 here because type 1 you
Okay.
have to keep monitoring. Do you envision a product since you are into engineering also and you are a great innovator also? A product like it should be like a watch or something, but instead of it should not be pricking us. But
Mhm.
without pricking, is there a way through which the glucose can be monitored so that the people around the world who have diabetes, it's not such a pain, pricking fingers at it every time. After some time, the fingers get sore. Getting a blood test done, it's not feasible every day. So, do you imagine or do you have an idea or is there a chance in future that there will be a device which can monitor our blood glucose levels because I'm also a type 2 patient? blood glucose levels can be monitored without those bricks?
That is a great question. Like that, I'm actually very glad that you asked that question because that's been something that I've thought a lot about recently. I've searched quite a bit into it. And there has been some research to try and implement it into a smartwatch or some technology that you can wear. The problem with it that I've seen is that it's much harder to accurately detect blood glucose. So the way that the current sensors work is they actually sense the reaction. They sense a reaction in the glucose molecule around the filament. So a filament is, you can imagine it like a little string that's attached to the end of the glucose monitor. It's like a semi-metallic string, so I think there's a bit of something that it's reacting with. But so it senses that reaction by actually interacting with the molecules, the glucose molecules, and then that sends the information to the transmitter that processes that data and then sends it to your phone. So the important part there though is that it's actually interacting with the glucose molecule, so it can directly get a reading of the concentration and like actually fully accurately assess how much is happening and what the quantity of your glucose reading is. But the issue so far that a lot of science and engineering researchers have had is that having a wearable technology, like a wearable device that somehow scans through your skin, it can't get the same readings as accurately so far. So it works for something like blood oxygen level because that actually can change the color of your blood. So it makes it a bit darker red if you're deoxygenated blood, and then a bit more red if it's oxygenated. But with something like glucose, there's not really like a very visible, easy to assess marker. And the technology has to be much more accurate because it's actually something that could like medically respond. If you get someone's heart rate a bit wrong on a phone, like usually that's not going to have like a serious consequence because it's just sending someone an alert saying, hey, you're running a little quicker than normal, or like you're running and you're getting a little tired. So it's not the same stakes. So you have to get the technology perfect almost for it to even be implemented. So that's the hard part, is getting it accurate enough that it's actually going to work in a way that people can essentially like condition their entire lives and connect it to their insulin pump, which is like automated. So if you send the wrong information about what your insulin is, that could be very dangerous. So
Yeah.
it's a bit of a technology aspect, but it's also about how high the risks are and how accurately you have to do it for it to be worth it.
So I'm hoping in future, once you complete your degree, you'll pursue it. So since I know you now, I'm going to purchase a gadget that would be created by you.
Thank you, thank you. I really, that would be great. My goal is to get much more into like sensor technology, and so I'm learning a bit about it now in some of my classes. Like we're making some little robots, and they have to do some sensing. So I think that is like a very interesting field, and I want to move into that a bit more.
How do you keep counting calories? How did you learn that?
With counting calories and carbs and all your macronutrients. So I'm sure you know this, but calories, essentially, there's three macronutrients that you look out for. There's your carbohydrates, your protein, and your fat. There's also alcohol, but that's usually not factored into the main ones, but that also does have calories. So when you start with diabetes, and even for someone who's not, but with diabetes, you're more heavily focused on the carbohydrates because that is carbohydrates, and with that sugar because that is what changes your blood sugar. But protein and fat also do. They affect it in some way. It's a bit more of a like it's a less dramatic way where if you have a juice, you're going to see your blood sugar spike. But if you have some fat, it might just go up a little bit over a long period of time. So it's less of an impact. You can actually plot it on a graph and you'll see. But when it comes to counting calories, the way I started was I used an app. And there's plenty you can see. Usually they're health focused. So someone that goes to the gym and wants to track what they're eating to make sure they're getting their weight goals or their calorie intake proper, you can use one of those. And there's some that you can take a photo of your meal and it'll tell you how much. What I started off with was I actually had a scale for like a month where I would just weigh every single thing that I'm eating, search it up, how many calories, what the carbs were, and just understand the macronutrients and everything I'm eating depending on how much it weighed. That takes a while, and after a certain point, it's very tiring. But it is useful. It really is useful because you get an intuition, and it you start to just understand the quantity in a way that I don't think anyone has, like, intuitively, right? So just looking at a slice of bread, I'll know that that's 32 carbs. Like, I'm like, I just know that 2 slices of bread, that's 32. And so that's usually something that the average person is never going to think about, right? But the more you actually like search up what you're eating, you better understand it, and you log how much you're eating. So for each meal, you track what you're doing, track the actual macronutrients. You understand it a bit more, and in the practice, it comes with habit as well.
See, when you go to college, you go out with friends, does it pose a problem? Because you will be counting calories on the plate, they will be having different foods. Has it ever stressed you or put an emotional toll? Because being at this age, when you are going to have friends, when you are going to have a lot of outings, you are in college, you got diabetes when you were in high school. So, did it pose a problem? And how did
Yes.
you deal with it? Because there are so many kids out there who will feel like I'm in a ton of problem. It's because only I have this thing. How did you deal with that? Because you have such a clear this cheerful disposition, and you have turned this adversity into an opportunity. How did you do that? What shifted in you?
That's a good question. It is difficult, and it is a huge stressor depending on like where I am and what foods I know are going to be available. So if I'm at home, it's much easier for me to understand. But if I'm out and I don't exactly know what the restaurant's going to have, I have to sometimes decide what's on my plate by what I know is going to be the safest option. So usually things like whole grain, more protein, more fat, and fewer what I like to call simple, like what they call simple carbohydrates. So that's your very heavy, starchy white flours. So something like a cake. That's very obvious. That has a lot of sugar, very white flour. That's going to shoot your blood sugar up. But even something like a meal, like pasta, that has a lot of carbs. It's a very, very starch. Everyone knows this. You feel really tired after, right? Because that's for the average person, that's kind of your glucose going up and then dropping a little. But for me, I have to be very careful because it's hard to tell what they're putting in the food sometimes. And the biggest problem for me in the past is when I go out to barbecue restaurants. So like I don't know if you've had, but like Korean barbecue where you go and you cook the meat on a little stove, like you cook it yourself. I thought that would be so fine because I am just eating steak. I'm eating steak and some vegetables, which in theory shouldn't have any carbohydrates. But I was so confused as to why my sugar was soaring into the clouds every single time I would go. And I found out it was because that the sauce that they put in the meat had a
Oh,
lot of sugar. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, even then I'm not safe." So when it comes to actually dealing with the stress, you have to be prepared for your meal to kind of have to be regulated. So if I could put it into 3 points, I would say one, think carefully about what actual ingredients are in the meal that you're buying. So look at the carbs, but more than that, look at like the type of carbs, right? So it's okay to have whole wheat, but something like really high sugary foods, you got to be a bit more careful and try to avoid those. Not always. You can still have cake every now and then. Like I love cookies, but in regulation, try to avoid them in general. Two, so you're thinking about what the actual food you're eating. Second is think about when the meal is going to arrive. So if you're at a fancy restaurant, sometimes they take longer to get the food to you. And with diabetes, you typically want to take your insulin 15 minutes before your meal so it has some time to set. And if you put your insulin when the food comes to your table, then it can go too high. But at the same time, I've also in the past taken it expecting the food to come, and then they forget to deliver. Like they forget to actually bring the food to the table. So that could also be a problem. So I don't really have any perfect advice, but if I could say anything, sometimes you can take half of your meal before you know the food is coming. And then like just have a juice box just in case that they don't actually get the food to you. And then you can take the remainder of it when it actually brings the food to your table. So yeah, those the first bit, and then the third one would probably be have like some type of calculation method ready so you actually know what's in it. So it could be one of those apps, but just also feel free to Google what's in the meal because a lot of times at the restaurant, you can search up the nutritional facts and they'll tell you, and it's usually pretty good.
Did your friendships change when they knew that you will not be as comfortable as you were earlier in the hangouts with your friends or something? Did you get like lose few friends and gain more friends who were very understanding, or was it same, your friends were very cooperative, they understood your situation? Because different people, they are in different groups, and sometimes being teenagers, they might be insensitive.
I am very grateful that my friends were very supportive throughout it. And so I never really ran into problems of someone judging me about it. My friends understood, and I think especially with how sick I was when I was diagnosed, they kind of saw the severity behind it and they're like, okay, this is a very big concern. But regardless, they're great people and I'm happy to have them in my life. So I know that they wouldn't judge me for something like that, but they'll also be like someone to help you in those moments where if I need blood, if I need a juice box, but I don't have one, maybe they'll be like, oh, I have a snack in my bag. Do you want something? So try to surround yourself with people that are going to be supportive because at the end of the day, it affects your health, but it's more than that. It's just knowing that they'll have your back when you need it.
And you did not say, like, what shifted in you?
Oh, right.
You could have been in so much of despair, like at such a young age, you got such a severe problem, and it's going to be with you throughout your life. How did you shift and you turned it into such a big opportunity where you are trying to create something which will help everyone? Instead of just filling yourself up with despair, you are creating an opportunity for everyone, not just for yourself. And I mean, you are really a cheerful person. I
Thank
honestly
you.
mean it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I think the biggest thing for me is there's a community almost around people that have this condition because in general you go through the same experiences every day and you know what the struggles are going to be. So for me, actually, one of the easiest ways to make a friendship is when I find out that someone's also type 1 diabetes, I can immediately start asking them questions and just connect like that without any other concern. It happened, I think, happened like 2 days ago where I was in a new class and I heard the alarm that's for my blood sugar, but I checked and it wasn't mine. So I was like, someone else in here. There's someone else. I know there is. And I met the person and it was just, yeah, it was great. Like we were immediately talking about the different devices we use and we were talking about like how our experiences are. And so it's like it's so instant to just connect with someone because there's no reason you can judge them. Like you have the same problems. Like you know exactly what you're talking about. And like even with my nurse at my hospital, she also is type 1. So like she has the same experience. So like it's everyone goes through those similar experiences. And so usually, right, you can like bond over that and you can almost connect immediately because you have those same experiences. So the way that I would say that I've turned it into an optimistic or a bit more of like a positive view in my life is actually focusing on the people that also have it more than just the condition, right? Because I know I'm not alone. That's great. So I know I have people I can talk to about it. And I know that at the end of the day, it shows that I'm trying and I'm working really hard to take care and to regulate what I'm doing. So I know it takes a lot of work, but it's almost rewarding in a sense where when I see that I'm managing it well, I know that okay, at least I'm taking care of what I need to take care of, and I'm doing the best I can. And also it's kept me healthy. As like a side effect, I eat very healthy and out of necessity. But I wasn't that unhealthy before, but like it forced me to have like a really clean diet. So that's like a bonus, I guess. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Have you noticed sleep or stress, exercise? Does it play a role in glucose spikes?
So okay. So there is a list of 42 different effects or factors that can actually influence blood sugar. So the main ones are what your meals are and how much insulin you're taking. But things like stress, sleep, and most notably exercise, because exercise directly influences your body's sensitivity to insulin. So if you do a very high intensity cardio workout, like you're running, that's going to probably drop your blood sugar a lot because your body's just so much more responsive to that insulin that you're taking. And so your question, sorry if I'm mistaken, but your question was about sleep, right? And was it
Yes, like
primarily sleep?
how have you noticed that sleep, exercise, or stress does it play in glucose spikes? Like
Hmm.
since you're monitoring it continuously,
Right.
so
So what I've seen is stress makes it go higher for longer periods of time. So in the summer, when I'm relaxed and I'm at the beach, it drops a bit lower. But then when I'm really stressed before an exam, it'll stay high. And sometimes I just need to like almost double what I would be doing in the like it actually is much more. It's very surprising. And then exercise, yeah, it drops it. Sometimes it'll bring it up and then drop it, but typically it lowers. And then with sleep, there's actually a specific mode on my insulin pump that accounts for sleep, and it basically it sets like a higher threshold because sleep it can have different effects. So it's a bit more, it's like less certain.
wow, that's incredible. So I know that many of our listeners are eager to learn more about managing life with type 1 diabetes while chasing big dreams. What advice would you give to teens in similar situation? I mean, life crumbles. It's not just about impacting food choices.
Mhm. So if you're someone specifically going through diabetes, then there's a lot of advice, but I've talked a lot about that, and I want to focus a bit more broadly on someone who's not going through just diabetes. I want to go through the average person who's either having a mental health crisis or someone that's very stressed about their academics, maybe a sport team, like maybe you were on a sport team, you got injured, and that's absolutely devastating because now you can't do the thing you love most. So we all have these difficulties that we go through, right? And to varying degrees of how intense they are and how much they can actually impact you. But what I've learned from my condition would be that some things are in your control. And so within the realm of what you can actually do, make the most effort that you can. So for what you actually can control, make sure you're doing the best possible. Try and find a community as well that you can like work together with so you don't feel so alone in what you're doing, and approach some of these things that you're going through as somewhat of an optimistic mindset. I know it's a bit hard, right? Because you can't just say, "Oh, just be happy, it's easy." Like it's not that simple. I know that. But really what I'm trying to get at with it is that things don't feel good now. And for a long time, they might not feel as good as they once were. But ultimately, it takes a bit of trust and faith in yourself that you can overcome some of these negative experiences if you just work through it and surround yourself with like people that you actually want to talk to. And that's not to say that the problem will go away entirely, right? Sometimes the problem will stay. And depending on what it is, like if you have like an injury, that could completely force you from not playing a sport again. But there's other ways that you can approach that, right? So maybe you can't play that sport anymore, but you learn that you're actually a really good coach and you can actually like help another team be pretty good. And then in that way, you find success in it. So you have to adapt to the change as it comes. And even if things don't go exactly as you planned or as you initially wanted, there is a bit of optimistic and there is opportunity you can change, you can find in it. And so it's kind of looking for the good moments and looking for the positive ways that you can spin something. So it might not feel good, but see if there's a way that you can actually shape what you're doing and change it up a little so that maybe it helps you a bit more. Maybe it's helping people around you because that's a big thing. And just trying to make an impact not only on improving your own lives, but see if you can help the people around you just a bit more as well.
That's so inspiring.
Thank you.
If you shift the focus from yourself to somebody else, the problem looks small.
Yeah.
So we want to know something about the RISE program. Since you are a RISE fellow, can you explain what RISE is and how it has impacted your life and career? And if somebody wants to be a RISE fellow, what do they need to do? Because it's not a very well-known thing. Certain people know it, but so many of us, they don't know it.
So, Rise for the World was a program founded by the Rhodes Trust and Schmidt Futures, which is like a company in New York. Um, and essentially, their goal was to take these 100 students from around the world each year and kind of connect them, help them work together, and essentially give them the opportunities to work on these projects that they're really interested in, but either they don't have the finances to do or they don't have the right connections, and just basically create a community of people that are already working on things that they care about and see if they can learn from each other and take that back and apply that in their own sense. Unfortunately, they did stop accepting new applicants for the program, but there are plenty of similar programs out there that if you just research like scholarships for people in high school or fellowships that I can join while I'm really interested, there are similar opportunities out there. I think let's see what's a good one. Usually you have to search something like either social entrepreneurship. That's a good word to search up. Change making, like typically there's like keywords that a lot of organizations will use in their actual promotional material. One that is pretty good, there's like a moonshot fellow challenge or moonshot, like I think I have a friend that participated in that. It's similar idea where like you work together in a little group and you try and compete at some problem that's going to tackle an issue in the world. So while you can't join Rise specifically, there's a lot of similar programs out there, and I would totally recommend people apply to them and apply to as many things as you can, because you might not get the first couple that you apply to, but when you actually do eventually get something, if you keep shaping your application and learn from your experiences, it helps a lot. And connecting with people that are also very motivated, for me at least, has been like one of the most impactful, like life-changing things that's ever happened. It really has showed me that I thought these dreams that I had were a lot, but then learning that there's other people who are also dreaming and actually like getting more of it done and they're making a big goal, it's so inspiring because now you see them. You say, they're doing so much. Wait, but like I know them. Now I want to do more. And then you kind of build off each other and you learn different skills. And it's really nice to be around a community. That's why. Like I keep bringing back this sense of community, but that's sort of the benefit in some of these programs, is because you meet other people that you may not have at your school or you may not have in your small little neighborhood, but you meet people around the world that are also kind of, they care and they care about similar things to you, even not the exact same, but the idea that they care about is making a difference.
They're as motivated as you are.
Yeah.
So how did you get an opportunity to speak at University of Cambridge, I think? No, University of Oxford.
Oxford.
Did you
So
go to UK or is what you got an opportunity to go to UK?
yeah, yeah. So it was with Rise. So they do a summit at the Rhodes Trust and like at Oxford University. And so while you're there, they give you the chance to do like these like lightning talks, they call it, which is essentially like it's like a 5 to I think 5 to 10 minute talk about something that you're working on or some project you care about, and it's like in a nice little room, and there's a very nice lighting, there's a sound system, and you essentially present some of these ideas that you're having. So I talked about essentially what I've explained so far. I talked about my concern with diabetes, and because it was other people that were focused on problem solving, I showed more of an idea of how these problems are also happening in the medical space, and how, for me, one of the most important things that I actually did with that was combining the medical aspect with this environmentalism I had. So taking two different areas you're interested in and bringing them together, that was kind of my focus, how the combining part.
Thank you so much. Now we will be moving towards some lightning round questions. There are small questions.
Oh, okay.
If you could invent any gadget for diabetes management, what would that be?
I want to make an insulin pump that works on its own and I never have to press any buttons.
Nice. And if you could have any superpower, what would it be?
For a superpower, I want to be able to teleport so that I can go on vacation.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail?
If I knew that I couldn't fail, I think I would gamble. I would do I would play the lottery. If I knew I
Nice.
couldn't fail, I would play the lottery.
You will win all the money.
In the past 3 weeks, I have 3 of them. And in 3 years of having diabetes, I essentially have an entire box full, which comes out to, I think, around 100 of them. Life events and selfies with my friends.
What's your favorite way to unwind after a long day of studying or working?
I have a nice book that I've been reading before I go to bed. Siddhartha Hermann Hesse.
Yeah, I know about this.
It's good. I recommend it. But yeah, I'd probably say reading. I haven't read much last semester, but I started reading a bit more, and it's nice.
What would you do if you had all the money in the world?
I would try and see if I can. I'd buy a nice little house for my family, and then I would try and help improve education in places where they really need it. Because if everyone's working on projects and if everyone's learning a lot about the things that they care about, I think that benefits everyone.
True.
Yeah.
So that's all? You'll just spend on education? You have a ton of money.
Oh, well, there's a list of things like see if we can end diseases, try and see if we can go to Mars. That would be pretty fun.
So what would you do for yourself?
Oh, for myself specifically? I want to go, I would travel a lot. I want to go on vacation places. So I want to go to Tokyo and like Kyoto in Japan. That would be really nice. New Zealand, that sounds very fun. I want to go surfing. That sounds fun. I think I would be bad at it, but like I know how to swim. But
Since you
to
have all
actually
the money,
surf,
you can hire surfers who can teach you.
exactly. Yeah, there's no worry about it. There's anything. And then I would eat a lot, like a lot of good food. Yeah, that's my last thing. A lot of good food. Private chef, maybe. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. You guys have been great hosts, and I loved the questions. They were very thoughtful. So yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And if you have an interesting story to share, or if you're a change maker, contact us.